Good afternoon. It's Friday the 16th of October 2020, just after 1 o'clock. I'm your host, Mike Robinson, for UK Column News. Do apologise, fluffed my lines there, Patrick. Patrick Henningsen joining me today and also messed up the lower third, so we're doing well already. But look, we're going to get straight on here because, well, lots going on and, well, it's all going to end in tears, Patrick.
Yes, indeed. And tears of a certain type.
Well, tears of a clown. In fact, 3 of them on screen at the moment.
Sadiq Khan, Boris Johnson, and Matt Hancock. And it's all about tears, we're told, Mike. Can you help us navigate through this?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, because we started off a number of months ago, if you remember, with the 5-level DEFCON system. We were going to be running from DEFCON 1 to DEFCON 5, with 1 being no transmission of the virus and 5 being infection spreading at dangerous rate. And the most recent announcement on this particular form of status was that we were on 3. We'd moved from 4 to 3. Well, they didn't tell us that we moved back to 4 as such, but that's basically what's happened. But they then decided that this was too complicated and we needed to simplify it. So we've gone from 5 levels of DEFCON to 3, and here it is. We now have medium, high, and very high, levels 1, 2, and 3, and we're not really sure whether we're supposed to be in level 2 or level 3, because of course this is all about local lockdowns now.
How come there's not a low? There should be low level, right?
No, because apparently we're not ever going to get back to low level. We're only going to be medium, high, and very high. So Corona is confused about all this and confused about which levels various parts of the country are in. Now, of course, the announcement this morning is, or the agreement this morning is, we'll be talking a little bit more about this a little later, is that Lancashire has agreed now to move into Tier 3, which is the strongest level of local lockdown there is. Pubs closed, people not allowed to associate with each other, and so on. And this was on the basis, Patrick, of them getting more money.
Well, it's all about money,
It's
isn't it?
all about money, that's what it is. It might be about a bit more than that. Of course, lots of stuff in the press about the fake rebellion from the north, Andy Burnham in particular, saying that he is not going to accept Boris Johnson's attempts to move Greater Manchester into level 3. Ministers backing off apparently backing off following Burnham's demands, but of course this is all fake, isn't it?
Well, it's a WWF show or WWE show, fake wrestling. So really they end up arguing, Mike, about what, should we lock down this much or should we lock down a bit less? And then the press love this type of argument because you get sucked into the minutia of whatever the bureaucratic decree is coming from central government, and without anyone asking the question, should we be locking down in the first place? And that's not even on the table in terms of this discussion. So they've masterfully created another cul-de-sac, which they're very comfortable operating at.
And as you rightly point out, of course, there is no low level here. It's medium, high, and very high. And as you say, the mainstream press has put people into this cul-de-sac very cleverly, and it's taken the no lockdown option off the table completely.
So they're basically saying that COVID's permanent, and these lockdowns are going to be permanent. This alert system, this tier system, it's here forever, and there's no possibility that there could ever be a low level or a non-crisis level. I can't believe people aren't calling them out on this. This is the most amazing, egregious propaganda move yet.
Yeah.
And they're not being called out on it by the mainstream press, really. I find this unbelievable.
So, look, what's the situation with biosecurity?
Well, just for a little more, if people want a little more depth on this, we've done an analytical piece here, which I've written for 21st Century Wire, and really looking at the Joint Biosecurity Centre. They're the ones who apparently are informing the science advisors who are then making the decisions or the recommendations to mayors, to regional governments, whether to lock down or not, or whether it's going to be a Tier 1, a Tier 2, or a Tier 3 situation. And GCHQ, one of the cybersecurity directors, Dr. Claire Gardner, we look at her. She's apparently a qualified epidemiologist, a medical researcher, and cybersecurity director. But this merging of the intelligence services with the cabinet office, in a way, with the government, creating a new layer of national security state bureaucracy, basically. So this, like we saw in the aftermath of 9/11, where we had a Department of Homeland Security in America, for instance, and all of these different security state layers that came on top, and all the gravy trains that kind of go with it and feed off of it. Now you have the biosecurity departments, and in the UK, the Joint Biosecurity Centre. So this is identical to the process that took place post 9/11. Only now, instead of Islamic terror or Islamist global war on terror, now it's a war on the virus, for instance. But it's hard to determine whether they're declaring war on the virus or they're actually declaring war on the population.
I think it's the latter, and you're absolutely right. All roads lead back to the Cabinet Office. The Joint Biosecurity Centre falls under the auspices of National Security Agency and obviously the National Security Advisor, who is in the Cabinet Office as well. So,
but it's very opaque, and this is what we pointed out in this article here: opaque and unaccountable, the dangers of the new COVID biosecurity complex.
Yes.
So that's the main point: is we don't know a lot about who's sitting on all of these departments and who's working in these departments and so forth. A lot of it has got a sort of layer of opacity over it.
Now, we were just talking about Andy Burnham in particular, and the BBC News article here is COVID, Andy Burnham holding the government over a barrel, says Rab, with this fake rebellion from the north. And I say it's a fake rebellion for a reason. We'll come on to that in a second. But Andy Burnham making all kinds of threats. But who is Andy Burnham? Well, we know that he's former Labour Party MP. He became the Mayor of Greater Manchester. But he's not just the Mayor of Greater Manchester, because he is also the UK's representative on this body, Metropolis. Metropolises apparently are for and by their citizens, where participatory and effective metropolitan governance fosters economic development, sustainability, social cohesion, gender equality, and quality of life. And the key word in that, aside from all the sort of typical buzzwords of the day like sustainability and social cohesion and gender equality, the key word there is participatory, because as we've been highlighting for a long time, Patrick, the form of democracy that's being built around the city-state in the UK and globally, in fact, as represented by this organisation, is one of a form of participatory democracy. You know, most people think when they hear the term participatory democracy, they think that the individuals get to participate in the democratic process.
Therefore, it's a good thing.
And therefore, it's a good thing. But the form of participatory democracy that's being pushed by this crowd is one in which only certain vested interests, the experts, get to participate.
And the stakeholders.
Yeah. But the rest don't. And this is extremely dangerous, to coin a phrase.
It's an illusion of democracy.
It is.
You know, wrapped in all of these sort of cushy globalist language.
It is. Now, if you go and look at metropolis.org, which is the website for this organisation, you can see there's first-hand experiences to rethink our cities following the pandemic. This is all about change and change agents and using the pandemic to drive this change. And they say, we are the global network of major cities and metropolitan areas. We serve as the hub and platform for metropolises to connect, share experiences and mobilize on a wide range of local and global issues, in addition to being the focal point of worldwide experience and expertise on metropolitan governance. So one of the reasons that these northern cities and unitary authorities are pushing for more money is because they have a very clear idea of where they want to go in terms of their governance, and it's not as part of the nation of the UK. They want extra money to continue to push for this. So if they're required to impose government-sanctioned lockdowns and so on, well, they want the money to do it their way and to implement the policies that come through this type of organisation.
And put this Metropolis slide back up on screen for a minute. Look at this. Look at how it's designed. Look at how the language is formed. This is basically a subset of the Great Reset, which is coming out of the World Economic Forum. That's how you should look at this sort of thing. It's the localized sort of franchise of World Economic Forum initiatives of the Great Reset.
Yes.
And this is now the cat's out of the bag already on the Great Reset. Boris Johnson's let the cat out of the bag, so have other world leaders, that this is what the actual agenda is. And yes, it's come out of Davos. in Switzerland.
Yes. Now, if you want a little bit of extra background, have a look at Martin Edwards' article. Now, this was originally published in 2016, but it absolutely still applies because Andy Burnham is also on the Global Parliament of Mayors. So the headline on the UK Column website, you'll find it towards the bottom of the front page, is the Global Parliament of Mayors and the Abolition of the Electorate. I recommend everybody reads that and tries to understand it because it's a key point of understanding where we're going in terms of our governance, where our relationship is going to be between us as individuals and the state. The key term there is abolition of the electorate.
Absolutely. So this is a new skin, if you will, that's going to be laid over the top of what we initially have. So this is moving things, nudging things more towards a global government, and then the power is going to be just devolved into cities, into global cities and global city-states, because this is where the urban populations are, this is where the numbers are, this is where you get your mandate, and really just eschewing and ignoring and marginalizing everything that's outside of that, politically, culturally, and so forth.
Yes.
So.
Yes, right. Now, it's not all bad news because, well, here's the Daily Mail, and for once they seem to have published an article which is a little bit honest about, a little bit more honest about what's going on. So the headline here is Truth about the claims scaring us all to death, soaring infections, teeming hospital wards and terrifying death rates, but do the numbers justify crippling new lockdowns really stand up to scrutiny? And, you know, when the mainstream press does something useful, then we should highlight it and say, well done, I suppose. But let's have a look at what they have to say here. First of all, on paper, the 95% statistic revealed earlier this week by Liverpool City Councillor Paul Brandt conjures up a disturbing image of overflowing hospitals and inadequate care. So rest assured it bears no relation to reality. Indeed, on Thursday, Liverpool University Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust dismissed Mr. Brandt's claim, insisting that its units were only 80% full with just 47 of its 61 critical care beds occupied. That may still seem high, but it's actually perfectly normal for ICU beds to be full at this time of year. And this is a very key point, Patrick, because from the beginning of this, from when we started commenting and reporting on COVID from March onwards, one of the things that we have been trying to get across to people is that the mainstream press is in general representing normality as something which is abnormal. So we've got normal levels of hospitalizations, we've got normal levels of deaths, and they're being represented as something abnormal. Now, what then consequently happened in April as we went through this was that we started to see abnormal levels of deaths once the lockdown started to have its effect. And one of the key things that resulted came about as a result of the lockdown, of course, was the NHS reoriented itself totally towards COVID-19 to the detriment of everything else. They effectively switched off every other NHS service to a large degree. People weren't getting the support they need, and that naturally resulted in deaths. And then we had the issue of the removal of medical support from care homes, which also resulted in deaths. So there was abnormal death in April and May, but as we've said many times, that was, or we're calling it, lockdown death. Now, what's going to happen this winter? This is a very interesting question because, of course, the NHS, the narrative that's attempting to be built at the moment is that the NHS is going to maintain all the services that they switched off in April and May over this winter period, and that puts even more pressure on the NHS than was potentially there in April and May, and therefore we've got to do much more to protect the NHS this winter than we did in April and May, and that's one of the things which is driving this justification for lockdown.
And worse, Mike, that you could see an absolute repeat of the killing fields in the care homes. And as bad as that scandal was, and as easy it is to figure out what went wrong, the same conditions are being put into place that you could have a repeat of that this winter as well. And of course, they would blame that on COVID, when in fact you have the use of injections and things like this. Basically, when you withdraw care, and then it just becomes a numbers game with regards to care homes, and then people end up, being put on the death pathway, for instance. And if they happen to be PCR positive for COVID or coronavirus, then they'll get counted as a COVID death. I mean, this wholesale fraud right across the board. And so, you know, what we have is the politicians and we have the media that are wringing their hands, hoping for a spike in deaths, that they can rally around the deathometer and then celebrate that, here's our second wave is finally here. It's almost like they're just, you know, desperate to have the second wave. I mean, this is a really sick
it is
mindset.
Yes.
That the mainstream media and some people, I'm sorry to say, in the academic and medical professions as well, who are on the side of this, people who are on the side of the pharmaceutical agenda, and politicians, gagging for a second wave, gagging for deaths, and they might say, no, we're doing this to save lives, but they know that if they can get their numbers or create their numbers, it will justify all of the policies that they've taken, all the failed policies that they've taken since last March.
Yes. So let's work our way through this then. The Daily Mail mentions the claim, which is that COVID-19 death rate is actually high, and the reality is it really isn't. So they say such fears date all the way back to March, when the World Health Organization morosely announced at a press conference that the virus had a mortality rate of 3.2%, and they go on to make the point that it really isn't anywhere even close to that. Then one of the next claims that they debunk here is a second spike could cause twice as many deaths, and the reality is far fewer people are dying now. So they're saying the disturbing claim dates back to the report from July by the Academy of Medical Scientists, commissioned by Chief Scientific Advisor Sir Patrick Vallance. So we've got a problem right there. And then it goes on to say, which estimated that there would be 119,000 deaths if a second spike coincided with the peak of winter flu. And of course, this was followed up, Patrick, if you remember a couple of weeks ago, when the Chuckle brothers, Patrick Vallance and Chris Whitty, gave a press conference where they effectively produced their own version of the global warming hockey stick graph, and showed that the levels of deaths were going to go exponential within 30 seconds. Now, of course, it's not happening, and the BBC's explanation for it not happening is that, well, you know, deaths follow infections, and it's going to be a few weeks before we start seeing the deaths. But of course,
exactly what I was saying. The media's saying, just wait, it's coming.
Yeah, it's coming.
The deaths are coming.
Yes.
Just wait 2 weeks, two more weeks.
And of course, the deaths are coming because they come every winter. It happens every single year. And the question we've got to be really careful about is there anything abnormal going on? Or is this normal mortality being dressed up by the mainstream media to be something abnormal? And this we've got to be really careful about. So let's move on to the next claim here from the Mail. The Mail's highlighting that the current wave of infection will tear through the elderly. And the reality, we're far better prepared for this time around. Now, this one, I'm not entirely sure that the Mail is correct about, because as you've already mentioned, there are signs that the care home industry is going to fall into exactly the same traps that it fell into in April. So I'm not entirely sure that the Mail is correct on this one. I don't think we are better prepared this time around. Some people might be wise to what happened, but it's not generally understood.
We should be better prepared. I think this is what the Mail's trying to say. Or the knowledge is here that wasn't there last winter, theoretically. Anyway.
Yes. And then the next one, the next claim, there's no such thing as immunity, is the next claim they want to look at. But they say that the chances of reinfection are low. And they're saying here that earlier this week it was revealed that a 25-year-old man in the US caught COVID for the second time, leading the University of Nevada's Dr. Mark Pandori to warn that there could be significant implications of our understanding of COVID immunity. Now, of course, they're dying for this to happen, because the idea that there's no potential for immunity against COVID justifies the continuing lockdowns. It justifies the potential use of health passports, because unless there's a danger of reinfection, then they can't really justify the cost and the inconvenience of health passports and immunity passports. And of course, the chances of reinfection, it has to be reinfecting us, otherwise they can't justify the mass vaccination of everybody. So it's very important that they start building a narrative of reinfection. And again, we've got to be very careful about whether it is actually reinfection or something being dressed up as that.
It's a coronavirus, clearly, and we've been living and existing with coronaviruses for many thousands, I don't know, tens of thousands, maybe millions of years. So there's nothing new in terms of humans' relationship with these sort of viruses. We've always lived with them, but what they're trying to do, Mike, is elevate this so-called novel coronavirus or COVID-19 into kind of rock star status, like it is just greater and more powerful than all of the other sort of seasonal respiratory viruses, and we must worship the power of the corona. And that's one of the main dogmatic tenets of the branch Covidian Church, the new cult, the Covidianity. You must defer and recognize the power of COVID, and we need to do all of these things because we need to protect people against COVID. So they're really inflating it well above its station epidemiologically. So, you know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on to the next one. We will never get to herd immunity is the claim that they were looking at this time, and the reality that they describe is we shouldn't rule it out. And of course, any look at Sweden at the moment demonstrates that we shouldn't look it out. Now, the naysayers about Sweden say that, well, Sweden had pretty much the same kind of levels of deaths that the UK did. Sweden absolutely acknowledges that they made the same mistake with respect to care homes that the UK did, if you want to call it a mistake. They followed the same policy with respect to care homes, and that resulted in deaths in care homes. But the fact is that no week goes past at the moment, Patrick, without another video coming out showing the normality of life in Sweden at the moment. People not wearing masks, people not in lockdown, people using public transport, using bars, using restaurants, getting on with their lives in a way pretty much the same that they did prior to the whole thing starting. Now, some people argue that, well, Sweden's much more of a surveillance society. In fact, people in Sweden are already getting microchipped and this kind of thing. But you can't it's very important not to overstate this. The total number of people carrying microchips in their arms in Sweden at the moment is 5,000. I can't remember off the top of my head what the total population of Sweden is, but that's a very small proportion.
And as a corporate, it depends what company they're working. There's certain corporations that are rolling that out, right? So it's not a national policy.
No.
So
it's something that's being sold to teenagers a little bit to make it more convenient to pay for stuff, but it's not something which is general across the population at all.
But the main point is that there's no general threat to the Swedish population. It's not a national emergency for everybody, because it's proven that this seasonal respiratory virus, this coronavirus, doesn't really pose a threat to the vast majority of the general population. It poses a threat to a specific demographic, a specific group of people. And so this is why the Great Barrington Declaration that was put together by led by some of the top British scientists as well, and US scientists have said just this, Mike, is that we need to focus on where the problem is, and everyone else doesn't need to be on lockdown. We need to get back to life as usual, allow herd immunity to happen. And so a lot of people have signed on this, and they've come under attack. Matt Hancock himself attacked it on the floor of the Commons just a couple of days ago. So there's definitely a concerted effort to discredit this common sense approach. This is natural immunity. They're representing the kind of natural herd immunity approach, and now the science is being attacked basically, and they're trying to create a new science or a new consensus. And so lo and behold, Mike, the reaction, the counter-reaction to the Great Barrington Declaration is here, and it's called the Jon Snow Memorandum. So they're using the name of the historic British physician, I believe, who discovered cholera or discovered, how to defeat cholera.
Now, I'm going to say here, Patrick, that is why they've chosen it. One reason why they've chosen the name. I'm going to suggest that another reason they've chosen the name is because it sounds very similar to a popular television character from Game of Thrones, and that will naturally trend on Twitter, because even today there's still a lot of Twitter traffic which is related to Game of Thrones, and this will get it'll get spread around Twitter a lot broader as a result of that similar name. It
also helps to bring up its reputation as a kind of moral and ethical sort of guiding light here. So this is the UK establishment's anti-Great Barrington campaign. This is the only way you can look at it. It's come out, it's been signed by apparently more than 2,000 scientists, researchers, and healthcare professionals who've signed this new memorandum, the Jon Snow Memorandum, which is basically saying that there is no natural herd immunity. This is what they're claiming here. And they're getting traction. I mean, here is the paper here, Mike. This was in the Lancet just a couple of days ago. The scientific consensus on COVID-19 pandemic, we need to act now. So this is the Jon Snow Memorandum, effectively. And they have a link within the Lancet article where you can go and sign the Jon Snow Memorandum. So they're using the Lancet to launder, basically to launder the reputation of this, which looks to me, Mike, very political. How do I know it's political? Well, look at the key word. Whenever you see this, you know that it's political.
Yeah, consensus.
So the scientific consensus. So the real science, there is no consensus. This looks so familiar, Mike. Where have we seen this before? Climate change, global warming, climate change. So now we know the game is up, okay? Cards are on the table. This is political, 100%, because you can't have a consensus in science. That's anti-science to say that there's a consensus. Science is an ongoing process. And it's ongoing by the thousands and thousands of scientists and doing research and to discover things and totally moving the dial all the time on any of these issues. So let's look at one of the lead authors on this, Mike. And here she is here on Twitter. She's doing the rounds on the BBC at the moment. Her name is Dr. Nisreen Alwan. And this is what she says. She says, I am talking about the fallacy of herd immunity by natural infection on BBC World Service here, hashtag Jon Snow Memo. And so the fallacy of herd immunity. So who is she the Galileo, Mike, of epidemiology? I mean, all of a sudden, there's no such thing as herd immunity. We woke up on Monday, and according to all these great establishment-oriented scientists, there is no more herd immunity. So this is the battle, Mike, between synthetic immunity and natural adaptive immunity. So the pharmaceutical industry, the government, the Jon Snow Memorandum, they maintain that the only path to herd immunity is via a synthetic pharmaceutical intervention, i.e. vaccines. And of course, this is what the pharmaceutical industry and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation maintain, and this is why they are invested to the tune of tens of billions of dollars to find a vaccine. So it is synthetic immunity versus natural immunity. That is the paradigm. That is the battle right now. So it is really corporate versus science. That's how I would frame this. That's how I would look at it.
Absolutely. Now, at the beginning of that, you said that Matt Hancock in Parliament had attacked the Great Barrington Declaration. Well, he said that herd immunity is a flawed goal without a vaccine, even if we could get it, which we can't. So he's made a statement in the House of Parliament that we can't get herd immunity. That's definitive. It wasn't an opinion. It was in Parliament. Was he misleading Parliament there? What qualifies him to say that, other than he's been told that by who, Valence or Whitty? So he's repeating something which he doesn't know for certain is actually true.
So he's been given the crib notes from the SAGE team or somebody within SAGE, or who knows, the cabinet office, and he's gone and repeated those?
That's right. So he then went on and he said that a number of infectious diseases such as measles had never reached herd immunity. And well, unfortunately for him, Harvard University's Dr. Martin Kulldorff and Stanford's Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, have said, well, in fact, actually measles, okay, there is a vaccine, but actually before the vaccine was ever there, it wasn't normal that everybody got measles. There was already a level of herd immunity there. So you know, the experts have once again dismissed Matt Hancock as not being, or as being less than honest about the reality there. But anyway, let's move on back to this Daily Mail article, because the next claim, only a circuit breaker will stop the virus. Well, there's the reality is it will only delay the inevitable. Now, of course, the government claims that that's all they're aiming to do, is to delay the inevitable until such times as a vaccine is available. But it's still going to be another year before a vaccine's available. And in fact, a circuit breaker would stop the virus or delay the inevitable for at most 28 days, according to most sensible or honest scientists. So doctors and epidemiologists. So 28 days isn't exactly delaying the inevitable. It is inevitable in any case. So this indicates once again that it's the wrong strategy.
I mean, how ridiculous of a situation are we where you have politicians and their advisors coming up with these abstract concepts like circuit breaker and trying to basically shove that into real science, claiming that this is the solution, the circuit breaker. That's what they're saying this week, Mike. What's it going to be next week? Is it going to be something else? It's going to be like they'll have a new term and a new strategy, and they'll just keep trying, because what they're doing, Mike, is they're hoping that science will eventually conform to their ideology, which is a technocracy, basically. If they just keep trying, oh, this technique's not working, don't worry, we're going to try something different next month to stop the, oh, there's my thumb, it's super glued to my knuckle, to stop the virus. Stop the virus. Eventually, this virus is going to learn to conform to our technocracy.
Yes.
Science will conform eventually. What does this remind you of? The Soviet Union. This is what happened in the Soviet Union. This is what led to the Great Famine during the Stalin's times. They had these crackpot science advisors and a corrupt regime, a Politburo, and it led to death and destruction of historic proportions. There's no question this is what we're looking at right now.
Okay, and then let's look at the last one that we're going to look at from this article. There are more, so go and have a look at it for yourselves. It's worth the effort. Infections are running higher now than when Britain went into lockdown in March. And the reality, according to this Mail article, is there's an increase in cases, but only because we're testing more. And I think this is absolutely a key point here, Patrick. We've been banging this drum for quite some time. A positive test result does not make a case. And a number of points about the positive test results, of course, PCR tests, the number of cycles that the sample is processed through affects the accuracy of the result. PCR, you're not supposed to put it through, if you want an accurate result, any more than 30 cycles. We're often, if not always, putting it through more than 40 cycles, sometimes 45 to 50 cycles. And so what you're getting is vast numbers of false positives. Some people saying 80–90% of the positive results are false positive results. So a positive result is not a case, and we've got to get away from this language.
And it's not even an infection.
Yes.
It's not even an infection as well. So it's not a case, it's not an infection. But what the media aren't saying, and to the last point on the Daily Mail, Mike, is that when people come, right now when they're coming into hospital for whatever reason, they're being tested right now for COVID. That wasn't necessarily happening. They didn't have that much testing going on even back in March. So there's going to be more, quote, cases by nature of the fact that everyone who's stepping foot in any of these healthcare facilities is going to get tested. So that's ramping the numbers up. But even still, Mike, even by ramping all of those tests up, the casualties are not there. They could, because you can't conjure those up as easily out of thin air.
This is true. Now, I just want to highlight one comment from a reader of the Daily Mail article here, which says, excellent analysis, but unfortunately this is now a political game with Johnson trying to get to a position where he tells us he has saved us all from a terrible disaster. The facts don't enter much into his workings. And I think that's absolutely correct.
Joe Stalin.
Yes.
Joe Stalin.
Now, another article from the Mail, because this is something I just wanted to get your comments on here, Patrick, because around the same time that article was being published, here's another one. Back on the COVID front line, intensive care units are seen packed with patients struggling to breathe as wards fill up and tired doctors worry they face crisis all over again for an indefinite period of time. I'm not going to bother going into this, the content of this article, but what this demonstrates is the absolutely schizophrenic nature of the Daily Mail at the moment, Patrick, with a small number of voices, Peter Hitchens being a notable example of it, injecting some sanity and reality into the Mail articles, but 80–90% of what they publish, just this kind of fear-mongering rhetoric to the delight of the government?
Well, it's a big organization. To take the Daily Mail, for instance, it's a big media organization, and they do have kind of separate departments. The Mail on Sunday, being slightly separated from the Daily Mail, but even within the Daily Mail, you have differences of opinions. I'm sure you have different political viewpoints. You have some people that are more conservative, and you other people that are more sort of Trotskyist, more like the sort of Tory, you know, mad socialist, Trotskyist, conservative government. Okay, and then you have the labor crowd as well. So you have there's a big. I think there's a variety of viewpoints within the organization of the Mail, and I think they have to make compromises editorially within their organization to also to keep their writers and their reporters happy. So it is a mixed bag. It might appear to be schizophrenic. No doubt it might be schizophrenic, but there's probably a good reason for that. Is that there is no consensus within the Daily Mail. That's my personal belief.
Take on it, yeah. Well, let's come back to Matt Hancock then, because of course a week or two ago, he was, or a few days ago, he was in the House of Commons, and he made this comment that a trial investigating vitamin D has taken place, but it did not appear to have any impact on the effects of COVID-19. Now, this is quite spectacular, Patrick, because, well, Matt Hancock probably has been a member for quite some time, but certainly needs to be added to the new Liars Club.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes. Hancock must go, I think we need to be saying here. But the reason that we say that, of course, is because it's now come to light that there was no such trial. It didn't exist. He lied.
He literally made it up. I mean, there used to be rules against that, right?
Oh, there still are rules against misleading Parliament, and it would be very likely that if somebody was, if we had a properly functioning democracy, that anybody that told a fib like that in Parliament would certainly not be a Minister or Secretary of State for too much longer.
That's clearly not just a mistake, Mike. That's not a typo on Hancock's part. That is someone who's clearly making something up in order to win an argument. So that is an absolute lie, a total fabrication on his part. Quite obviously, go back and look at the clip and you'll see.
Yeah, now, was it on Wednesday's program we mentioned the big vitamin D mistake? This was a scientific article talking about Finland and type 1 diabetes and the fact that it had plateaued and then decreased after the decision to fortify dietary milk products with vitamin D3 since 2006. And the point that they were making was that the role of vitamin D in innate and adaptive immunity is critical. And they were then recommending that the government change the requirements for daily intake of vitamin D for the numbers that are on screen. We talked more about this on Wednesday. Well, I've been told, and thanks to the person who sent this through to me, that doctors in the UK and the NHS are now getting advice on vitamin D, and they're being sent this little piece of information. They're being asked to test and report blood serum levels of vitamin D for all COVID-19 patients. Now, whether they're able to do that, of course, bearing in mind that Roche is not providing blood tests at the moment and the blood tests are being rationed, that's another question. But then they go on to say to add vitamin D3 supplements to all patients' treatment packages. And then they are also giving people within the NHS this particular document. And there's a bit.ly link, a bit.ly link at the bottom there, which is VitD COVID-19 info. Well, that leads you to a document, and here it is, COVID-19 and vitamin D information. Now, you're not going to be able to read that on screen. You don't want you to read it on screen.
We'll put the link on the description below on YouTube after the show.
Absolutely, it will be there. But the key point that you should note here is that it says this document is for medical professionals only. So it's not intended to be used by lay people or by journalists as such. But on the other hand, what it does is it goes through supporting evidence, graphs, links to scientific papers. It's a really fantastic reference. It's still available online, and anybody that has an interest in vitamin D would be wise to go and have a look at it. But one of the key points that they make in that, of course, is that vitamin D isn't just about an immune response and the ability of the body to produce an immune response. It also has a direct impact on the progression of COVID-19 in a particular way, and you'll see that when you read the document. And they're making the point that, as we've made many times in this program, that the elderly are certainly vitamin D deficient, but actually everybody in the UK in the winter is vitamin D deficient.
So it has therapeutic qualities and benefits as well.
Yes,
so that's another side of it.
Particularly in helping reduce the likelihood, because one of the problems that people that have had a particularly strong adverse reaction to coronavirus is this thing called cytokine storm, when the immune system basically goes into overdrive and kills the patient. And this vitamin D has a particular effect to push down on that possibility. Mm-hmm. So anyway, if you like what the column does and you would like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community, and there are options to help us out there, and that'd be very much appreciated. Just to let everybody know, David Ellis produced another program yesterday. He was speaking to Admiral Lord West. He was the former head of the Royal Navy, of course. He was giving a strategic forecast of what's happening to the Royal Navy while it's waiting for new ships. And of course, he was making the point that, in fact, there's going to be a massive gap between ships being retired and new ships coming online. He was calling that a national disgrace. Go have a look at it if you would like to. A reminder of AV 11.1 coming up on the weekend of the 1st of November. Well, you'll be speaking at that, Patrick. I
will be doing the Great Reset. I'm doing a talk on the Great Reset.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay, so details at alternativeview.co.uk, also on the UK column website. Tickets available there. Okay, let's get on to this then. The Covert Human Intelligence Sources Criminal Conduct Bill had its third reading yesterday, Patrick. Well, as you can see, that is the front page of the bill itself. And you'll notice that it talks about the European Convention on Human Rights. We'll explain why that's important in a little bit. I'm just going to give a little bit of a run through once again on this. This is the third time we've covered this, but still quite a number of people saying, have you seen it? Have you, are we aware that this has been going on? So clearly a lot of people watching the UK column news maybe don't watch it every day, haven't seen our coverage of this. So I'm just going to give a brief reminder of it. And it's important that the European Convention on Human Rights is mentioned on the front. But just let's remember what this is about. It's a bill to make provision for and in connection with the authorization of criminal conduct in the course of or otherwise in connection with the conduct of covert human intelligence sources. So these are agents working for the state. They might be people that are working for the police or for the intelligence services within campaign groups, or it might be people that are working for HMRC or so on.
Might even be informants, perhaps. I don't know how long this extends, this ability.
It extends far and wide, as you'll see in a second, Patrick. Now, the key point here is that up until this point, it has always been accepted that in the case of undercover work, that people that are working undercover may end up getting involved in criminal activity, because in the course of the undercover work, in order not to blow their cover, they've got to take part in it. And also there was an understanding that that in the process of taking part in some level of criminal activity, that they may actually end up gaining intelligence, which then prevents a much bigger harm from being done. But, and this was the key point, up until this point, there was always the understanding that if you were caught committing a criminal offence and it wasn't justifiable, that you were given no immunity from prosecution, you could be prosecuted for that, for whatever it was you did. What this bill does is it removes that potential prosecution. It gives immunity, but on top of that, it also removes the ability for people that are on the receiving end of the criminal activity to bring any civil cases to get compensation. So the example that is cited are the women that were drawn into relationships with agents of the state, which were fake relationships, and whereas they didn't view them as fake relationships, they ended up having children in some cases. This was viewed as absolutely wrong, and rightly so. So that's the situation. Now, in the debate for this, if you remember, James Brokenshire was the Home Office Minister who was giving the presentation, the main presentation in this. And he was saying, this legislation is being introduced to keep the country safe. It's all about safety, Patrick, to ensure that our operational agencies and public authorities have access to the tools and intelligence they need to keep us safe. So safety was the main justification for it. But we don't need to worry about anything because, historically, we've always done this. That was his argument. We've always used covert human intelligence. In fact, from Sir Francis Walsingham right up to the present day. And the last time I was commenting on this, I said, well, that was quite an interesting example to give, because of course one of the points that people are making here is that this bill doesn't put any restrictions on the types of criminal activity that are allowed to be used. And people were asking, for example, would torture be allowed? Of course, Walsingham used torture liberally. So anyway, the other thing that most people now finally recognize is the range of organizations that can authorize this criminality. So any police force, National Crime Agency, Serious Fraud Office, any of the intelligence services, any of Her Majesty's Armed Forces, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, Department of Health and Social Care, the Home Office, Ministry of Justice, Competition and Markets Authority, the Environment Agency, the Financial Conduct Authority, the Food Standards Agency, and the Gambling Commission. I mean, it's just spectacular, the breadth of agencies that are now allowed to authorize criminal activity without any real oversight at all, no judicial oversight. There's got to be some kind of recourse to the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, but what have they ever done in the past? Really nothing to deal with breaches of the Investigatory Powers Act in the past.
So this is the state giving carte blanche to every single agency under its umbrella, basically to have at it, basically, and do what they want with no recourse, no redress of grievances as far as the public are concerned. I mean, this is a full-on, I have to say, it looks like a full-on fascist takeover.
I think that's a fair assessment of it. But you don't need to worry, Patrick, because Brokenshire again was saying this, specific reference to the Human Rights Act in the bill, and in fact on the cover of the bill, he was saying that you don't need to worry because in the course of this criminal activity, the Human Rights Act will be right there front and center, and they will be expected to behave within the limits of the Human Rights Act. But the question is, are we going to have a Human Rights Act? Because as the Equality and Human Rights Commission here said, when they were talking about what Brexit means for equality and human rights in the UK, they're making the point that in fact after Brexit, we may not have a Human Rights Act anymore because it may be replaced with a British Bill of Rights. And there's still, although this has kind of fallen off the radar at the moment, it's still being pushed forward with Geoffrey Cox here, the former Attorney General, saying that he wants to drive forward with the idea of a human rights bill. So Human Rights Act may not apply in the not too distant future, and of course you've got to look at these bills on a long-term basis. This becomes an act. It's gone through the third reading now, so it now goes to the House of Lords, and they get to see if they can make any amendments themselves.
But the question isn't so much, Mike, about framing it with the Human Rights Act as it is the rule of law. Because this is abrogation of the rule of law, basically. There are laws against criminal activity by the state against the people. Well,
that's interesting you say that, because here is a key point. It is to be expected there would not be state responsibility here.
That's a removal of the rule of law. And if you do that, then society, historically, history tells us society breaks down very quickly. Without the rule of law. That's one of the fundamental pillars of a society, of a functioning nation, of a state. So it's hugely risky to try this power grab.
So at the bill then passed its third reading by 313 votes to 98. Now that was a better result than the second reading, but nonetheless not so good. But the Labour Party, of course, had once again told their members or the MPs to abstain from the bill. But some members of the Parliamentary Labour Party refused to abstain from the bill. They voted against. Here's Dan Carden, who I'm going to single out here because he's one that absolutely voted against, and he tweeted out, as a matter of conscience, I must vote against the Chiz bill tonight. I've offered my resignation from Labour's front bench. And so some did
A
take
man
a
of
stand.
integrity. A man of integrity.
Yes.
In the House of Commons, that's incredible. Dan Carden, people should, encourage him for what he's done. He's taken a stand on principle. That's so rare.
Yes.
In politics right now.
And if you want a little bit more background for this, then Spectator has a good article here from Matthew Scott. The terrifying consequences of the License to Kill bill as it's being described. There were amendments last night really to try to put some limitation on the types of criminality that would be allowed, and those were defeated. So the House of Commons has failed here spectacularly. What will the House of Lords do? Well, our understanding is that the House of Lords is largely not functioning at the moment because of coronavirus. They're basically not allowed into the House of Lords. Many of the Lords don't have the ability for any kind of remote voting or remote access. And so the House of Lords not really at its full strength.
So what are they going to shove this through a few Zoom calls, Mike?
That's
a few Skype calls, and then back to the House again.
Basically,
to be rubber stamped.
Yes, that's where we're at.
Where's the democracy? Where's the government in this? This isn't normal democracy. This is an abnormal piece of legislation. A real outlier is being put through an abnormal democracy right now under the color of COVID. Under the color of COVID. Fantastic. Now,
many people may have noticed that there's been some stuff doing the rounds of social media involving the Oxford vaccine, the Astrazeneca vaccine, and this is one example of it. The monkey holding the vaccine in their hand with Astrazeneca on their white coat, we see the rise of man, or perhaps the fall of man, in the background as a result. Boris gets a bit of treatment here as well. He gets turned into Bigfoot. I like my Bigfoot vaccine, is what is being described.
Lost a few pounds as well, so it's quite flattering, actually.
Yeah, and then we've got this people queuing up to building with AstraZeneca on the outside and coming out as gorillas and monkeys. So this has been doing the rounds, and it's caused quite a bit of a stir in political circles. Here's Dominic Raab. And this is what he said. It's a shabby piece of disinformation, but it's very serious because it's an attempt to disrupt the attempts to find a safe vaccine. So this is what he was saying on the Radio 4 Today program this morning. And he went on to say, what do you think he said next, Patrick?
I can't imagine.
He went on to say, we know that Russia has a track record of disinformation as a foreign policy tool. There you go.
It must be the Russians.
It must be the Russians then. The Russians did it.
Do we know where it actually came from?
No.
We don't.
No.
So it's just, we assume.
We don't know whether it was 77 Brigade. We don't know whether it was a Rapid Response Unit in the Cabinet Office, or we don't know whether it was Russia. No idea, but Dominic Raab has decided it was Russia.
So a meme on social media has the power to derail the UK's multi-billion-dollar vaccine project.
Well, they're certainly implying that it has that power, yes.
Hugely dangerous, according to Dominic Raab. A bit of satire. Hugely dangerous. What sort of headspace are these guys in right now? Crazy.
It is, yes. Right. Look, let's move on to what's going on in the United States. There seems to be an election going on there, Patrick, at the moment.
There is. A lot of people don't realize it, but there is a presidential election going on in the U.S., Mike. And this is the October surprise has hit, actually. We were wondering what it was going to be, and there was hints that something was coming. Well, it looks like it's arrived. This is the first October surprise. There might be more coming after this, according to the source of this story, which was Rudolph Giuliani, the president's attorney who got active and made this story happen. So Biden's secret emails, basically what happened here. So the Ukrainian executives personally thanked Hunter Biden for an opportunity to meet his dad. And so this means that Hunter Biden had been denying, and Joe Biden had been denying, that there was any knowledge. He didn't know it was his son. I trust my son. I don't know what he gets up to in the Ukraine at Burisma. And he didn't do anything wrong, and I had no idea, and I wasn't involved. Well, it turns out that this proves that Biden, the presidential candidate for the Democrats, actually lied, but it's worse than that. Let's take a look at this. So Hunter Biden introduced his father, then Vice President Joe Biden, to a top executive at the Ukrainian energy firm Burisma. The firm was paying his son at the time up to 50,000 per month.
Wow.
Bear in mind, Hunter Biden has no experience in gas and energy or in the Ukraine. He was just gifted the job, and apparently had nothing to do with the fact his father was vice president in the Obama administration, and who Joe Biden was in charge of the Ukraine portfolio at the time. Nothing to do with that. It was just a coincidence. My talented son. So this story came out just in the last 48 hours, Mike, and look what happened as a result of this. This is what happened. This was the reaction by Silicon Valley. Twitter suspends the account of the New York Post. This is a major newspaper. And so they've published something that's critical of the Democratic nominee, Silicon Valley, Jack Dorsey, CEO of Twitter, big donor, big supporter of the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, and they close the account of a media outlet. Can you believe this? Let's go on. Facebook throttles it, puts a fact check warning on it, okay? Roadblocks it, basically. And check this out. Twitter suspends the account of White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany for sharing the story on Twitter, for retweeting or sharing it. She's the White House Press Secretary. So we hear all this talk, Mike, about meddling. The Russians meddled in the 2016 election, the 2018 election. There's no evidence of it at all. And here we see this is direct meddling. In fact, this is worse. This is what the Chinese government do. Anytime some bad information pops up on the Chinese internet, boom, blocked, roadblock, account closed, account suspended immediately, like a knee-jerk reaction. This is happening in a so-called democracy in America during an election, right in the last few weeks of the election. A story comes out that's embarrassing for one nominee, and they shut it down. I mean, so there's no difference really. So the corporations in Silicon Valley are doing what the Chinese government do, and so this is one of the roadblocks you get on Twitter. Your tweet could not be sent because this link has been identified by Twitter and our partners as potentially harmful. So a factual story. The Biden campaign have not said that these weren't authentic emails. So these emails between the executives and Hunter Biden. So there are questions about where this came from, where these emails came from. There's a whole very shady story of a laptop being left at a computer repair place in Delaware, and this is how these emails came to light, okay? So that's another story, but the fact remains, and this is the WikiLeaks argument too from 2016, was they are factual, these are real, and they do prove that the politicians were lying when they said otherwise. So let's look a little bit further on this, Mike, and say where this story actually goes. Well, a year ago, this was during the impeachment hearings, Mike, we published an investigative piece that we believe this is what the real scandal is. And so the media are, yes, this is a scandal. Yes, Biden lied, and yes, they're corrupt, and his son's basically grifting off the back of the Obama administration, getting rich. But there's another real story here. Hunting for Hunter, we published this back in November of 2019. Evidence reveals Biden-Burisma Ukrainian bond scandal. Okay, this is a financial scandal tied to a major U.S. investment firm and a whole network of high rollers in the United States. So this is the real story. Let's take a little closer look here and find out what is the story here. What is the real scandal here below the Biden email scandal here? Well, so the funds that entered the Burisma's accounts had illegal origins. This is the point that the media are not picking up on, okay? And so the funds that entered Burisma's accounts had illegal origins, and later, according to the evidence, the Ukrainian prosecution's office here, they were transferred to the accounts of 4 persons, including Hunter Biden's. So not only was Hunter Biden getting paid in this dodgy job that was gifted to him by his dad, basically, but he is taking money that had illegal origins that are being laundered through Burisma, okay? And these are, this is here the Ukrainian prosecutor, a quote from him. These are all Ukrainian sources, by the way, and we've double-checked them, and they seem to be very accurate, in fact. So and here's the second point. At the time when Burisma, the investigation in Ukraine, was underway, then U.S. Ambassador Maria Yovanovitch had blocked the visas of general prosecuting officers from the Ukraine in order to disrupt their working visits to the U.S. to share notes with U.S. Justice Department and colleagues. So she was a star witness in the impeachment trial. a year ago in Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff's impeachment trial. So she was in fact involved in covering up the corruption of the Bidens in the Ukraine. And so the whole impeachment fiasco, Mike, was cover, I believe, and many others believe, was cover to shield and deflect against a bigger scandal below the surface. I'm going to show you how deep this goes, though, because it doesn't stop here. And so they say here, we were supposed to share this information during a working trip to the United States, said Kulik, before adding, however, the ambassador to Yovanovitch blocked us from obtaining a visa. She didn't explicitly deny our visas, but also she didn't give them to us. She was in charge in the Ukraine at the time of the U.S. Embassy, okay? So you can kind of see how this is going. And so a little bit further here, the third point, according to prosecutors, these businessmen had siphoned off embezzled Ukrainian state budget funds with the help of an American financial firm, a firm with connections to high-ranking members of the U.S. Democratic Party establishment. Let's take a look at what that firm is. It's Franklin Templeton Investments, okay? And let's look a little bit closer here. The legalization, the laundering of these funds obtained illicitly via purchases by Franklin Templeton Investments of state bonds totaling something like $7.4 billion, okay? So let's take a little bit closer look here. What is this? This is a financial pyramid scheme, basically, that is being run. Let's take an even closer look. Let's look at the granular view here. Okay, the son of Templeton's founder, John Templeton Jr., was one of the biggest donors of Barack Obama's electoral campaign. And Tom Donilon, the chairman of BlackRock Investment, is also the biggest shareholder in Franklin Templeton. Donilon served as a national security advisor to Barack Obama. Look how high this scandal goes. That is a Ponzi scheme being run out of the Ukraine. So this is a bit of the battle of the oligarchs, Mike. There were competing oligarchs. Yanukovych was thrown out, one oligarch replaced by another, more pro-US oligarch. But really, there was a whole fraud and Ponzi scheme going on below this. And people in the Democratic Party were basically using the administration's privileges in order to profit off it and also to cover it up, and lots of people getting rich within the financial sector by these dodgy, fake Ukrainian bonds. And some of this was being run through London, through a bank in London as well. So all of the details are up at 21st Century Wire, Hunting for Hunter. And again, we had a great Ukrainian investigative journalist that we worked with in publishing that. And it didn't get a lot of publicity, but we believe that it holds a lot of the answers to the real scandal, the scandal behind the scandal.
Okay, well, look, thank you very much for that, Patrick. We're absolutely out of time. So we'll leave it there, unless you want to just quickly run through one more thing.
One last story. This is really important here in terms of the U.S. So the Democrats, lockdown is an election strategy. Here is Governor Whitmer. They're calling it the decision, Mike, not the election, the decision 2020. And here she is, Governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer. She's been very pro-lockdown. She's a hardcore Covite, okay. Michigan State Governor Whitmer tried to delay a court's ruling which was going into effect to delay it a further 21 days until after the general election on November 3rd, but the court rejected her attempts to delay on Monday. Basically, the court ruled against her lockdown, and she tried to get them to wait 21 days. So she wanted to keep the state under lockdown until after.
Now, how would that affect the vote?
It increases the pain and suffering. This is like sanctions, basically, on your own people. Maximum pressure campaign by the government. So she's literally caught trying to basically
game the election.
Well, Michigan's a key battleground state, and the election could be decided in Michigan. So her and the Democrat strategy is increase the pain and suffering because they don't want anyone to feel good or Trump being able to say, hey, we're going to lift lockdowns. Or don't you think things are already doing better in 2 or 3 or 4 weeks because your state's not locked down? So no positive vibes. And just to show you, this extends to the national level. Here she is, Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, fumbling with her mask again. And so what did she do? Well, Democratic Party strategy of maximum pressure on the American people being conducted at a national level after she basically calls to stop Donald Trump's $1.8 trillion coronavirus relief bill. So she won't let it pass.
So he has put forward a $1.8 trillion relief bill to give people financial support as a result of to deal with the effects of lockdown.
People, states, businesses.
And she is preventing that from going through. This should not be a political issue. This is about people's lives and their ability to survive in a pretty unpleasant situation, and she's turning that into an election issue. That's pretty despicable.
And I think she might have gone too far on this. Even CNN, Wolf Blitzer was pushing back on her. It's a classic clip. It's the first time I've ever seen CNN doing real journalism domestically in the United States. He was challenging her, and she got very upset, and she lashed back at him and attacked CNN's anchor, Wolf Blitzer, who's pro-Democrat to the core. But this is how desperate the Democrats are. They want to keep lockdown as an election strategy. They want the pain and suffering. They want the misery to extend just enough so they don't want to give Trump any opportunity to take credit or to see any improvement in the numbers, the economic numbers, or anything like this. It's a very cynical and a very dangerous strategy, and it could backfire badly on the Democrats, on Nancy Pelosi specifically, and Gretchen Whitmer as two examples.
Well, I think it's about time Nancy Pelosi retired, isn't it?
Yeah, about 10, 20 years ago, maybe would have been good, but
Okay, well look, we do have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Patrick, for joining me today. Thank you for joining us today. We will be back at the same time, 1 p.m. as usual on Monday. Hope you have a good weekend in the meantime, and we'll see you then. Okay, bye-bye.